Welcome to The Right Podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Williams, best-selling romance author, book coach, and founder of Serenade Publishing. I've been an avid reader since I could hold a book and have spent over a decade immersed in the world of writing, editing, and publishing fiction. I know firsthand what it takes to turn a love of storytelling into a sustainable, soul-aligned author career. Each week, I share real talk about writing fiction, marketing smarter, and staying inspired, along with up-to-the-date industry insights and strategies that are working right now. You'll also hear from fellow authors, editors, and industry experts who are out there doing the work and making waves. Here, we put the woo in the work of writing, publishing, and growing your author business. Think of this as your creative business pep talk, packed with heart, hustle, and a little bit of magic. So get cozy and join me. Your writing journey starts now. Hey scribe, Sarah here, and welcome back to The Right Podcast. This episode is a special one. I had the chance to sit down with the brilliant Candice Fox at the Sunshine Coast Fiction Festival. And let me tell you, this woman is an absolute powerhouse. She's one of Australia's top crime writers, a multi-award winner. And yes, she co-writes with James Patterson. And she's also completely hilarious and wonderfully down to earth. We talked about everything from her wildest research adventures to the reality of working with one of the world's best-selling authors. I walked away so inspired, and I think you will too. Let's jump into the conversation. Thank you, everyone. Candice, hello, welcome to the Sunshine Coast.
Hi, thanks for having me. Best entry music ever. I don't get entry music a lot, but that was just perfect. I think I'm going to insist on it from now on.
All right, so why did you decide to write crime of all genres? What drew you to crime?
You know, I was pretty serious about writing as a teenager. You know, if you ask my mother, she'll say I was flouncing around the house at 12 years old saying, I just can't work like this. I need my own laptop. And I was writing and submitting novels as an 18-year-old. My first few novels were all vampires and werewolves, though, which is a very difficult genre to get into. And I was taking classes and people were hammering me with this write what you know type of thing. And I really didn't know the settings for these novels. I was thinking I got to set it in New York, I got to set it in Paris because that's where these mysterious things happen. But there was a lot of crime in my life growing up. My mother had 4 kids and then she adopted 2 and then she fostered 155 kids as I was growing up. And so every single one of those kids came with their own crime story. And she's not a very subtle woman, so she was telling us all these crime stories. You know, she was saying, this kid's parents have been arrested for armed robbery. Let's do a drive-by and have a look at the bank they tried to rob. And my dad was also a prison officer for 30 years in Sydney prison, so he was coming home with all of his work stories. And because the house is just infested with kids, they're not keeping their conversations very subtle. They're just sitting there talking. So I remember as a kid being able to squeeze in between Dad's leather recliner and where Mum used to sit on the end of the couch, and I'd hear his work stories about, you know, who'd killed who in the prison or this new celebrity inmate who was coming in and all this. So I had all of those crime stories. And I can remember being a teenager and my mother loading us all into we didn't have a family car, obviously. We had up to 12 kids at a time. So we had a minibus and she was loading us all into the minibus. And we'd drive down to visit her friends, and then on the way back she'd stop by the Belangolo, and, you know, driving into the Belangolo forest at night, in the middle of the night, and she's saying, and now this is where the backpackers would have started to get really nervous. And she'd drive us in there, and she'd, I just need to stop the van and turn all the lights off. I just need to check something and try to scare the crap out of us all. She's someone who's fascinated by crime in a voyeuristic manner. And so I just absorbed that, and I put it into my writing. And from novel 5 onwards, I thought I would try crime. And it was novel 5 that got through.
Oh my gosh. So it sounds like a pretty traumatising childhood, really.
I've had a lot of therapy. I started ringing the kids' helpline at 12 years old to talk through what, to process what I was going through in that household. And I've consistently had therapy, since I was 12. And it's funny because every now and then I've moved a lot in my life, and I've had to get a new therapist, and they spend that whole first 1 or 2 sessions going, what? And then what happened? What? And why? And I've actually made spreadsheets and been like, okay, so they're divorced, this is their kids, she's in jail, this and that, and for new therapists. So yes, but it makes for a great career in crime writing,
It does. Oh my gosh. So what comes first? Is it plot or characters?
Oh, for me, it's either or. I'm working on my 22nd novel at the moment, and that's really it's really a question that I'm asking of a particular character. So the one I'm working on right now, that's not going to be out until 2027 because I'm a little bit ahead, and I want to ask this question. You're supposed to be ride or die for your child, right? It doesn't matter what they've done or what, And I have a 6-year-old, and I say to Violet all the time, there's nothing you could ever do that would make me not love you, and there's no problem that you could ever have. They wouldn't be right here to solve with you. But this mother in this book, her daughter has murdered someone. So I'm like, does that rule apply? Like, whose loyalty are you supposed to be with when you find out your own kid is a killer? So for me, that's a character study that I'm doing. But things like my latest novel, the latest novel that's come out, High Wire, I've got it for sale there. That was a concept. That was a plot problem. I had this idea about this outback track that makes a beeline across Australia, and really only bad people know about it. So drug dealers and serial killers and, drug smugglers and that kind of thing. There's this secret track, and I was thinking, what if you were the cop who was in charge of that slab of empty outback that has this really dangerous road running through it? And what kind of things might happen on that road? Who would be travelling on that road and why? And that's a novel that came out of plot, and I added the characters to it. I added a character in there. Her name is Edna. She's an outback cop, and she came straight out of my life because I do animal rescue. I'm a prolific animal rescuer because I love the adrenaline. I love grabbing wild animals. I know it's weird, but it's addictive. And I have this bird coordinator, and she manages all the birds that I rescue for wires in my area. And she's this tiny little lady, and she's 75 years old, and she'd be 45 kilos dripping wet. And she springs out of the back of this van that's full of these dangerous birds, and she's like, Candice, what have you got for me? And I'm like, here, I got this owl, And she's just insatiable. She's there in the middle of the night releasing these birds. I have seen her. I went to a job with her, and there was a tiny peach-faced parrot in a chimney. We didn't know what bird it was in the chimney, but she's stuffing her hand up there trying to grab this bird, and this bird came out and it flew. And these birds, I don't know if you're familiar with peach-faced parrots, but if anything is going to bite you, just for no reason, really hard, it's them. They are bitey, and they are fast as greased lightning. And it came out of the chimney, and she snatched it out of the air like Harry Potter with the golden snitch. And I point to her with Violet all the time, and I say, her name's June. I said, isn't June an amazing woman? What an amazing woman. This is what you can be like when you're 75. You know, this is what you're capable of, is being like that. What a hero as a role model. And so I wrote High Wire, and I wrote the character of Edna based on June. Yeah, and then I gave her the book. I let her read it without telling her. And then she came and she goes, oh, I loved your latest one. I love that Edna. You know, she's a woman after my own heart. And I said, you know what? Funny story. That's actually you, yeah.
Do you write about people you know fairly often?
No, I don't. Like, I don't do it a lot, and I don't do it in a very obvious way when I do it. It's gotten me into almost trouble territory before. I had this crew of builders at my house, and they were building a deck in my backyard, and these 4 guys, they just oozed with criminality. They were very dodgy sounding, dodgy looking, dodgy acting, and I didn't know them. I just picked them off, you know, the internet, and they're building a deck, and I just was fascinated by them. And my husband Tim said to me, every time I turn around, you're out there talking to those builders, you are costing us money. And I said, these guys are going to make me money. I don't just let me. It's research. I don't know how, but I'm going to use them somehow in a novel. And so I wrote these 4 guys. Originally, I pitched it to my agent, and I said, I want to write this book about these builders. But Gabby is a very posh agent from Bronte in Sydney, and she said, I hate to break it to you, Candice. She talks like this, but people don't find builders terribly intriguing. Frankly, these men sound awful. I don't know why you didn't use my builder, Pierre. And I was like, okay. What if it wasn't builders? What if it was something, you know? I said, what about firemen? And she goes, oh, firemen, that's far more appealing. I know a fireman, actually, you know, and all this. So I took the 4 guys from my backyard and I used them as the characters. And then I ended up setting the book in New York. So I went to New York and I met a bunch of firefighters. So in a sense, character-wise, I modelled it off these 4 guys, but I used the skills and knowledge that I knew from the other guys in New York, and I fitted them in. And it was funny because I was talking to a friend of mine, and she said, this is going to be a really weird question if you didn't do this, but your latest novel, did you put anyone you know in there? And I said, maybe. Why? And she said, well, I know this woman and her husband is a builder. And she was reading this book going, I swear to God, Matt, that's you. It's a fireman from New York, but I swear to God it's you. And I was like, oh, no. Does he happen to be from this building company? And she was like, yes. And I was like, oh, no. Anyway, Matt still had my number, and I'd ignored it for ages, but then I get this text from Matt going, my wife's really enjoying your new book. Did you? And I was like, oh, yeah. So it almost got me in trouble. Luckily, he was one of the... I mean, none of them are good people, but he was one of the better bad people in the novel.
Oh. How do you actually separate your fictional world from reality? You said you were, using these people as inspiration. Are you just constantly going, oh, you could be a murderer, you could be a criminal? Like, are you looking for clues everywhere?
Yeah, it's not so much clues. I really love, for example, I love the way that people talk. And I love dialogue. And people have said, I love your dialogue because it sounds so real. And I love little idiosyncrasies that people have. For example, I have another animal rescue friend, and she's a possum expert. So I've had to call her a bunch of times for advice to say, this possum is doing this, what does that mean? And so I've done over 600 animal rescues for wires, and I've done almost all of them with my daughter Violet in tow. And so we've been rescuing together since she was 2. Well, she's now 6. So in 4 years, we've done 600 rescues together. And Violet or whenever I'm calling for advice, I'm calling Kathy for advice about a possum. Violet's like, put it on speaker, put it on speaker. And I say to Violet, I'll put it on speaker, but you've got to let me talk to Kathy. And she goes, is it the Kathy that talks a lot? And I go, yes, it's that one. She goes, oh, why? And because I need to ask her this question, so you just shush. Violet's back there in her safety seat. And I'm talking to Kathy, and one of her verbal tics, which I love, is she repeats herself a lot, but she always says, as I said. And she says, as I said, really quickly, like it all slurs together. So she'll go, because possums, ringtail possums, they try to live up high. As I said, they really, and as I said, and it's this little thing. And whenever there's an ly word, she breaks it into parts. So she'll say, as I said, technically, you're not supposed to do this, and actually, and I just love those two verbal tics from her. Are just they make her sound really flustered, really fuddy-duddy, really, and she is like, it says everything that you need to know about her character, is that she goes round and round and she's kind of bumbly and she's adorable. She's an adorable person. And a lot of writing is show, don't tell. So rather than, if I'm writing an adorable character who's a bit flustered and a bit fuddy-duddy, I'm not going to say to you as the reader, she's a bit flustered and fuddy-duddy. I'm going to have her talk in this really annoying way where she links all the words together and breaks them up. And Violet can't stand her. She goes, the Kathy that talks a lot, Yeah.
Oh, that's gorgeous. How do you research your novels?
I have done all sorts of crazy stuff for research. And to be honest, it's things that I would have done anyway, just because I'm weird. But people say, oh, she's a crime writer. And they go, oh, that's why she met a serial killer. Or that's why, whenever I'm talking to cops, I see cops around. I used to work in a tattoo shop before I was writing, but I wasn't making enough money to live on it. And I was in this tattoo shop in the King's Cross, and the tattoo industry is very transient. You get different, tattoo artists coming and going all the time, and someone would inevitably hit the panic button under the desk accidentally, and so the Darlinghurst cop shop is just there, and they'd come running across the street, and we'd go, sorry, we hit the button. And I'd always go, but tell me, what's going on? What's the latest thing? And they would tell me these stories. In 2019, I was living in LA, and I watched a documentary on a serial killer named Lawrence Bittaker, and it was one of the worst things I engage in a lot of true crime, and it was one of the worst crimes that I've ever heard of in my entire life. It was awful. He was convicted he and a friend were a killing partnership. He was convicted of the murders of 5 young girls, in LA in the late 70s, and I believe it was a lot more than 5. And so I went down this rabbit hole of researching Lawrence, and I said to my husband, I'm thinking, Lawrence is on death row in San Quentin. That's only an hour and a half from here. I'm thinking about writing to him and saying, can I come visit you on death row, because I have some questions, about you being a serial killer and all. And if he says, yes, I want to go visit. And Tim was like, you're going to love that. Have fun. He was like, that's super on brand. But I did that not without a specific novel in mind. At that time, I had written 12 full novels without ever having met a killer before. And I wanted to try to get into the mind of a killer. And so I did that. And so I wrote to Lawrence. I wrote a very straightforward letter, because I thought, this guy's going to try and manipulate me. He'll be the Hannibal Lecter type who's full of mind games. My counteracting of that is I'm going to be as straight down the line as possible. And in that first letter, essentially, I said, I am coming And I'd like to speak to you. I'd like to ask you some questions, but please understand, I don't want to try to be convinced that you didn't do this and that you didn't mean to do it and, any of that stuff. I'm coming without any sympathy for you at all. I'm coming to understand the why, because to me, on the face of it, it looks like you are a monster. And I want to know if you are, and if you are, how did you get that way? And he was like, sure, come along, what the hell else am I doing, And so I went. And I didn't realise that, and there was no forewarning, that when you go to death row, San Quentin, you get the visitor's handbook. And it's not a book, okay? It's an A4 sheet of paper divided into 3 columns. And the first column says, oh, this is where you need to go and this is where you park. And the second one says, this is what you can bring in and this is what you can wear. Don't wear an underwire bra, because you'll be x-rayed. And you can only bring in notes, you can't bring in coins and blah, blah, blah. They slipped a little line in there in the second column which said, if you are taken hostage by an inmate, we will not negotiate with you. So no funny business, linking up with your inmate to say, let's get you out. No, none of that. And then there was this if you need to make an appointment, blah, 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 all this. And so I was like, I'll get there and it'll be, this guy's a violent serial killer. So it'll be like the glass with the phone. I got there. I went through all the levels of security. I was barked out by several guards and x-rayed and all that kind of thing. I go in and it says death row and they roll this thing out and I go in, they roll it shut behind me and then nobody tells you what to do. So I went up to this guard and I said, oh, hi. He's standing there picking his nails. He's not really looking at anything. And I said, hi, my name's Candice. I have an 8 o'clock appointment to visit an inmate. I don't know which window is mine with the phones. And he said, oh, who's the inmate? And I said, Lawrence Bittaker, the serial killer. And he said, oh, yeah, Lawrence is going to be in that cage there. And he pointed to this floor-to-ceiling steel cage with, it's like a shark cage, 2 metres by 2 metres, bulletproof glass all around the inside. And I said, oh, yeah, he's going to be in there. Where am I going to be? And the guard said, in there. And I said, at the same time? And he said, yes, at the same time. Did you not read the visitor's handbook? And I said, it's not a book. It's an A4 sheet of paper. And it said nothing about this. And I was about to say, I really don't know if I'm comfortable with this, blah, blah, blah. But they're bringing him out, and I didn't want to be rude. So they brought Lawrence out, and he was cuffed. And then they opened the cage, and they chucked him in. There's 2 plastic chairs in there and a table. And they said, all right, in you get. And so I got in, and they shut the cage door, and I'm sitting there on a plastic chair and I'm watching them. They thread a padlock through the cage door and snap it shut. And then Lawrence put his wrists through a slot at his side and they uncuffed him. And then the guard walks away around a corner. And I was like, this is how I die. Yeah, I didn't know that it would come to this, but strangely fitting. This is going to be great for promo. And then, so I was nervous. Obviously, I'm spitting out all this stuff. I was like, well, thank you so much for seeing me. And I like what you've done with the place. It's very industrial, chic. And it's a nice day outside and all this. And, I said, I'm a little bit surprised that this is happening. And he said, what, this? And I said, yes, this with the, I thought there was going to be, and he goes, oh, no, it's a full contact visit. We can touch each other if you want. And I was like, and he put his hand out to shake my hand. And I was like, oh, thank God you specified what kind of touching you meant. And I said, I can't get my head around it. Full contact visit. And he said, yeah, I said, what what, I don't want to give you any ideas, but what would happen technically if you like lunged across the cage at me? And he goes, oh, well, you know, see the row of cages, they've all got like a triangle cut out of the ceiling in every single cage. Yeah, so there's a rifleman up there. And if I do anything, you know, he'll just shoot me. And I said, well, I have a few problems with that because the bulletproof glass and the ricochet and like, how's he going to make sure he gets you and not me and all this kind of stuff. And Lawrence was like, Candice, I didn't design the system here. And I was like, oh, well, fair enough. Yeah, you're right, fair enough. I'm going on and on. He said, you don't need to worry. The only reason that I get full contact visits at all is because I've never hurt anyone yet. And I was like, sorry, yet? You know, but anyway, so we were in there for 5.5 hours and I got to ask a serial killer everything that I ever wanted to ask him. And it really turned my mind around about serial killers because, and I've met a few since and they're all the same, and they're not the Hannibal Lecter type who owns their crimes, you know, this genius, this almost supernatural levels of evil genius. They're just loathsome, horrible, slimy men who have no regard for their victims. They have no... It's just all me, me, me. Oh, poor old me. I'm in a cage 23 hours a day. Oh, I'm depressed. Would you like to be my girlfriend? You know, you want to be girlfriend number 5. I've already got... You know, he was doing his hair. You could see his reflection in the bulletproof glass behind me. He's doing his hair. I'm like, Lawrence, you're a 77-year-old serial killer. I don't know who you're warming yourself up for here, but it's not, you know, I'm married and I told you in the initial letter that this is not romantic and, yeah. So now I write more about people, normal people who kill and not so much the psychopaths, yeah.
Have you ever witnessed an execution?
No. What a random question.
I was just thinking you might have followed it up and then been there.
Know, I have looked into it, actually. So you can go and volunteer to be a witness for an execution because executions in the US need a certain amount of attendees, but you have to be a US citizen in order, or a family member or law enforcement or whatever, to witness one. So that was a really random question, but of course I've looked into it. Like, you were like, of course she's looked into it. I would be very interested in that. I'm up for anything really, and it's because you get things when you research that you couldn't possibly make up. For the firefighter novel Devil's Kitchen, I went to New York and I tracked down some firefighters. Initially, I had to go from firehouse to firehouse to firehouse, walking around the streets of New York, bursting in and saying, well, you know, I'm a novelist, will anyone speak to me? And the answer was no, 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 constantly. Finally, I found a crew of guys who would speak to me. One guy said, I'll get you in with my firehouse crew. And I said, what can I do to win them over? He said, they might be a bit edgy. I said, what can I do? He said, bring them cake. So I went to the best bakery I could find in New York and I got all the cake and I rocked up with 2 handfuls of boxes of cake. I was like, guys, talk to me. And so I had these 10 firefighters at this table at this firehouse. And I said to them, you know, tell me the most disgusting story you've ever heard. You know, tell me the wildest fire, the stupidest fire you've ever had. And they're just reeling out this amazing stuff and trying to one-up each other. But the best thing they said, I said, tell me the worst firefighter you've ever worked with. And they all looked at each other and it was unanimous. They said, it's got to be Nick the Dick, right? And they all went, yeah, Nick the Dick. I said, Nick the Dick? That is great nicknaming that you have there. Very inventive. Is he well endowed or is he just a dickhead? And they all went, that was kind of a bit of both, actually. And I said, why is he such a dick? They said, on day 1 of joining the firehouse, this guy walks in and he goes straight through the engine bays, through the sleeping area, into the kitchen area at the back of the firehouse. He hasn't spoken to anyone. This is day one. He opens a cupboard. He pulls down a mug. He doesn't check whose mug it is or anything like that. He just smashes the handle off on the counter. And then he gets another mug and he smashes the handle off. And the guys come up to him and they go, "Buddy, what the hell are you doing?" And he said, "I just joined here this morning. And so I'm making sure that I'm working with the right people, because if your coffee mug is too hot for you to hold without a little handle on the side, then I don't want to go into a burning building with you." And I was like, oh my God, what a dick. That's amazing. I can see Nick the Dick at this point in my mind. He's like a Joe Pesci style character. He's short and aggressive and he's got douchey hair and he's one of those guys that, Joe Pesci in Goodfellas, they said he brings a gun to a knife fight, and I couldn't have made that up. I had to go there to New York, meet these guys, get that story, and put it in the novel.
That's incredible. That's so funny. James Patterson, give us all the goss. How did that all start? The co-writing. What's he like?
Well, he's great. We've written 9 novels together, so I wouldn't do anything with someone 9 times if I didn't enjoy it. We met for the first time at a cocktail party in Australia. He was out here promoting a novel, and I didn't know that he was in the market for a new collaborator. But I had put my cheeky feelers out to my agent and my publisher, and I'd said, what does a person have to do? I was young and hungry. I was 3 books in and trying to make a name for myself, elbowing my way into the genre. And she said, there'll be a few people ahead of you before you to be put up for something like that. And I was like, well, if they all die and I'm the only one left over, who can say how that would happen? Anyway, I went to the party and he was led in. James Patterson is like the Brad Pitt of the authoring world. I've been on tour with him in the US and he comes down the aisle and he's high-fiving people and this kind of thing. And he comes in and he's got an entourage. And I know that at this party he's only going to be introduced to the important people. He's going to be introduced to that guy's the head of publishing, that guy's the head of marketing, that guy's this, that. He's not going to be led around to me. I'm going to have to go over. And I said to the people I was standing with, I'm going to go over there. And they're saying, you can't just go over there. One does not go over to James Patterson. And I was like, watch me. So I went over, I tapped him on the shoulder and I said, James, my name's Candice. I'm a writer too. I love your work. I read Kiss the Girls when I was 12 years old and it absolutely changed, blew my mind and blah, 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 all this. And he said, wow, that's really inappropriate. What was your mother doing when you were reading Kiss the Girls at 12 years old, And I was like, mate, we don't have time. And so I was just chatting. And I think that James, I think that he fancies himself a bit of a scrapper. He came from nothing. And I've got this terrible bogan accent from growing up in Western Sydney. So I think that he kind of got the sense that I was a scrapper as well and someone who was young and hungry. And we just really liked each other at the party. But my publisher was watching, probably because someone had said, what's Candice Fox doing over there talking to James Patterson? But she was watching and she was saying to herself, oh, they get on. And that's half the battle, isn't it? So she was going to give him a book pack to say these are our, top line authors or whatever. And so she slipped my book into that pack just as an experiment. And then turns out he picked that one to read on the plane home to Florida. And then he said, and I said to him afterwards, I said, did you remember me from the party? And he's like, of course I did. But I think he probably didn't. I mean, he would have met 150 people that day, But yeah, we just get on really well. And we write the novels together. You know, he's very over the top with the management. He's over my shoulder all the time. It's a bit of a stressful experience writing with him because it's so managed, and what we're writing is a very specific product. It's a James Patterson novel that, you know, so you'll write a chapter and you'll say, this chapter needs to be less than 1,000 words, because no James Patterson chapters are more than 1,000 words. So you're writing a very specific product, and he'll sit there and he'll say, no tattoos, no piercings, no graphic sex, not too much humour, none of this, none of that, because this is what James Patterson readers want. And in some ways it's very assuring, because I have this very experienced guy over my shoulder saying, this is going to work, this isn't, and we do lots of outlines together. So when I'm writing my own stuff, I'm just freewheeling and I'm like, is this good? I don't know. What's happening? But in other ways it's just very stressful. When I called his house for the first time ever, they said, call him, he wants to bounce some ideas about the next novel with you. And they said, call him at 10 o'clock your time. So I'm there and I've got my finger, I've got the number dialed in, and I'm going 3, 2, 1, dial. And I dialed his house. And, you know, I know that I'm calling his $34 million French chateau-style mansion on the beach on what they call Billionaires Row in Palm Beach in Florida. That's where I'm calling from my house in northwest Sydney, you know, with kids' stuff everywhere and whatever. And so I called and it rings and I'm like I'm beating with sweat. And someone goes, hello? And I said, oh, this is Candice Fox. I'm calling. I'm actually trying to get in touch with James Patterson. I was told to call at 10 o'clock, and this is the number. It's the right. He goes, it's me. He said, I answer my own phone. I've been answering my own phone for years. I said, oh, so have I, actually. It's so good to talk to you, blah, blah, blah. You know. So, yeah, he's fun. He's a fun guy. We haven't written in a couple of years because I'm writing these, I'm at the level now where I'm writing my own novel and I'm selling that to Hollywood. Every time I write a novel, I'm selling the film rights to it. And as a single author, I get 100% of those film rights. Whereas when I work with James, I'm getting proportions of everything. But we still are friends. We still catch up if I go to the US or whatever. It's a great relationship.
Do you have any movies coming out soon?
Well, I hope so. My latest one, High Wire, which is for sale, I sold that to Ridley Scott, who did Gladiator and Alien and Blade Runner, a whole bunch of other stuff. And the novel that comes out in April, I sold that to a company called SK Global, and they did Crazy Rich Asians and Hell or High Water. I have other projects with Universal, MGM, I can't remember the others, Lionsgate, whatever. And if one of them goes off, it's going to be great. But I sell the option and then I forget about it. Because Hollywood is full of that, oh, we're going to start filming in 6 months' time. And you go, oh, wow, that's amazing. And then they go, oh, we got held back by this or the funding or whatever. Or they say, we're in talks with Ethan Hawke at the moment. Do you like Ethan Hawke? And I go, oh, my God. And then I watch everything that Ethan Hawke's ever been in. And they go, you know what? We got somebody better than him. We can't tell you who it is right now. And you go, oh. It's just full of bullshit. They know it too. They know that they're full of shit. So
you're waiting till the red carpet moment.
Yeah, I never believe anything in Hollywood until the cameras are actually rolling. Yeah, that's when I believe it. When Thomas Jane was coming out to film Troppo, they had been telling me that they were going to make Crimson Lake into a TV show for 8 years at this point. And every year when they re-optioned the novel, they were taking me to lunch. And it started off as like, you know, down on the wharf at Sydney Harbour and this $400 or $500 lunch, you know, or I'm at LA and they take me to lunch and it's at Soho House and Jennifer Aniston is over there and this, and it's members only at this place. After 8 years, you know, the last lunch that they took me to before they made Troppo, it was at House of Pies in Anaheim. And I said to the producer, you know what, let me get this one. And so I never thought that it was going to happen. And then they gave me Thomas Jane's number, and because he was trying to promote, you know, and he was saying, we don't know how to say Trapo. Is it Trapo? And I was like, no, it's Troppo. And they're like, oh, Trapo. They're like, a tropical. Oh, Trapo. You know, I'm on the phone to him. And they said, you know, he's flying out and we're going to start filming on Monday. And I texted him and I said, are you really flying here? Like, are you really going to start texting on Monday? Start filming on Monday? Really, though? And he was like, I'm at the airport. It's happening. And I was like, it's happening. You know? I didn't believe it. Even when it was happening, I didn't believe it.
That's incredible. Yeah. Oh, my gosh. I'm going to throw it open to the audience. Questions?
Questions. Everybody, this is what... Whenever you throw to questions... And I've been talking for a while, there's this moment of people being stunned.
Yeah, there we go.
Go on, Lauren. So the question was, what subject do you really want to write? You haven't approached it yet. You know, I write the books fast enough that I don't have to desire to get into a subject too long before I have the opportunity to do it. But the untouchable regions of writing for me are other genres, because I don't really get time to do it, and I don't, you know, I'm encouraged not to do it by my agent, who's like, I want to make money, please stay in crime, you know. But I would love to write a post-apocalyptic fiction, because I think that they have the same sort of life or death, good or evil themes. We all like to think of ourselves as really good people and moral people and that kind of thing. But when the zombies come through the door, you're like, you know, and someone trips, like a vulnerable old lady trips in front of them. I'm like, do I save the old lady? You know, or do I shove a couple of other old ladies in front of them to slow them down? Like, it's that question where you say survival of the fittest. Like, do I go back? Do I help? And I love that about post-apocalyptic fiction. If we all had to be survivors, if we weren't just living, we were surviving, how fast would those principles and morals that you have go completely out the window, you know? And would you be good at it? Would you be good at surviving? You know, I've been on Richard Feidler a couple of times, and he loves my animal rescue stories. And he said to me, if the apocalypse happens, I want to be in your crew, because you will at least be able to catch the animals and we can eat them. And I was like, you can be in my band anytime. You can keep me entertained with the stories and the facts and things. You know, you can be the intellectual of our little band of survivors if you want, Richard. Yeah.
Any other questions? There we go.
I'd be a prey animal if the apocalypse happened. I would fold on the first day. I think that you would survive. But my question is, you've dealt with serial killers. Were they generally all men, or have you ever dealt with females? And what would be the difference between the two of them?
You know, I have tried to speak to some high-profile female serial killers. The drive for the men is the attention, that sexual attention from a woman, you know, and I find them very accessible. I was investigating, this is a whole other story that we don't have time for, but I got into a sort of a situation with a true crime, and I was fiddling around with this cold case, and I happened to have occasion to write to another serial killer, and it was the same thing. It was like, his message to me, in this one message that came back, He was hammering me hard to know two things. One, I found Jesus and I'm a totally new and wonderful and empathetic person. And two, you could be my number one girlfriend if you want, because that spot is always available, Because Lawrence had 4 girlfriends already and he was trying to recruit me as number 5. So I think that the female killers don't have that same drive to speak to a woman. I think I've gotten through the door with male serial killers a bunch of times because I'm a woman. I was writing for a little while because I aimed a letter at Betty Broderick. I don't know if anyone knows who Betty Broderick is, but Betty Broderick, she was in a high-profile marriage with this guy, and she was incredibly jealous of his new relationship after the divorce, and she was driven to rage and she burst into their room and shot her ex-husband and his new girlfriend in their bed. And I wanted to speak to her and understand, what drove you to do that. Talk to me about that rage and that kind of stuff. But she gave my letter to her cellmate, who was just an ordinary young woman. Her name was Anna, and she was a serial DUI, and she was driving seriously drunk with a friend of hers in the car, and she rammed her car into the back of a UPS van, and she killed her passenger, and she's in prison for life. So I was writing to her for a while. But she was just a normal person who'd made a terrible mistake, and she was 25 years old and staring down the barrel of the rest of her life in prison, and it made me so freaking sad. It was hard going, and I let that relationship slide. Yeah.
That's pretty rough. Any other questions? Oh, over here.
Hi. There's a mic coming. Here it comes.
Yeah. Yeah, hi.
Hi.
Been great listening to you.
Thank you.
In your opinion, how important is it for an author to have a literary agent?
Oh, yes. In my opinion, how important is a literary agent? Incredibly important. If you want to be a traditionally published author, incredibly important. I have always been fascinated by the slush pile. What's in there? Who's reading it? That kind of thing. And I was in my publishing house a couple of years ago, and I said to my publisher, how many times in your career have you ever gotten a novel out of the slush pile? She said, once. And I said, and that's in a 25-year career. And she was sitting at a table with a whole bunch of other publishers and bigwigs, including her boss. And she said, yeah, that's in 25 years. I pulled one book out of the slush pile and didn't do that well. I said, everyone else, how often? And they were saying never, never, never. They've never gotten anything out of the slush pile. And that's because they don't have to. Because the agents will trawl through that in that 10 to 15,000 submissions per year that the big 5 get, and that's probably more now, that's the good, bad, and the ugly. And they do not have the time and the resources to go through those 15,000. But the agents are doing it on purpose. They are trawling through, trying to find their next golden goose. And the other thing that an agent will do for you that you won't be able to do on your own is any agent that's worth their salt will get you a deal here in Australia, but they'll also sell your translation rights. So my novels are translated into like 20 different languages, which means there's 20 different countries that I get an advance for every time I sell a novel. So that for me in the early years was the difference between having a day job and trying to be an author, and because they're not huge amounts. I think for the first time I was ever translated into French, for example, it would have been for Crimson Lake, so that's my 4th novel. I think I got $3,000. But not only did I get France, I got Italy, I got Germany, I got, the Ukraine, I sold the Hebrew rights, and so all those small amounts become something that you can live on. And I would not have had any of those translation rights without an agent. Yeah.
Yeah, incredible. Thank you so much. One little thing, though, that I heard, it's your birthday next week.
It is.
Happy birthday. What are you
Thank
going
you.
to be doing?
Well, actually, so I turn 40 next week. It's the big 40, yeah. I'm very proud of what I've done for 40. I love my life. I have a beautiful child. I have a wonderful husband. I spend every spare minute wrestling wild animals and doing weird stuff, research. But my husband said to me, "What do you want to do on your birthday?" And I said, I want to have a big party. And he said, "Who do you want to invite?" I said, "I want to invite every crime writer in Australia. I want to invite all my friends. And those are my friends. You know, they're all crime writers, and I want to talk industry gossip all night long." Michael Robotham is one of the biggest gossip queens in the entire industry, so I was like, let's make sure that he can come because I want the gossip, the delicious gossip. And I think that's a testament to how much I love my job, is that on my birthday, I don't want to hang out with my family. I don't want to hang out with my normal friends. I want to hang out with my work friends, and I want to talk about crime and murder in industry. And I think that's really cool. It makes me happy to think about that. So
I love that. You're definitely living the dream, doing what you want to do. Yeah. Thank you so much, Candice. Let's give her a round of applause.
thank you.
What an incredible chat. Candice Fox brought so much honesty, humour and insight to that conversation. It's not every day you get a behind-the-scenes look at a writing partnership with James Patterson, let alone from someone as real and refreshingly candid as Candice. If today's episode gave you a boost of inspiration, make sure you're following The Right Podcast, and don't forget to explore all the writing support waiting for you at serenadepublishing.com. Thanks so much for being here, and until next time, happy writing. Thanks so much for listening to The Right Podcast with Sarah Williams. If you enjoyed today's episode, it would mean the world if you'd leave a review and share the show with your writer friends. It helps more creatives find their way to us. And don't forget to follow Serenade Publishing on Instagram and TikTok for more writing tips, publishing advice, and exciting events to keep you inspired. Keep writing, keep dreaming, and know that I'm here to support you every word of the way.